everyone, and welcome to another special edition of the Titanic, the Titanic month. And I am very delighted to welcome today's guest. And today's guest is Parks Stephenson. Parks, hello.
Hello, how are you doing, Sarah?
Oh, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Oh, I mean, we've definitely had a bit of technical issues going in and out, really, but we've made it. We've made it all fine, really. Even though if it's December of the time recording, I mean, it's just crazy with everything holding up as well.
Yes, I mean, we had some technical issues, but can't complain. I'm talking to you in the UK from California, near real time, so can't really quibble about that.
I mean, I'm so jealous that California, it's always sunny and it's always hot, but in the UK in the winter time, it's not really that
Well,
exciting.
exactly. California has the weather, but it's not quite so hot right now. Maybe you would consider it's in the 50s right now. I know I'm wearing a tropical shirt, but that's because I wear it all the time. But we're getting a bit of a chill
I mean,
here.
it's all temperature different, really. But oh, I definitely wish I was in a warmer climate.
I gave you
Anyway,
degrees in Fahrenheit, not centigrade. I apologize for that.
no, 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 no. It's fine. It's fine. I mean, I don't know really the difference anyway, really. So that's just like fine. So, Parks, we're going to be moving on. But is there anything else that you want to talk about as well? Because from what I understand, you have done so many things that have contributed to the Titanic and the military. Because not only you were a naval officer, you had a very big career including your involvement with James Cameron.
Yes, after I retired from the Navy, I embarked on an aerospace career as a systems engineer, but at the same time, I pursued a parallel career in ocean, oceaneering, and I've had a lot of luck. One of the first steps of luck was meeting Ken Marshall, who introduced me to James Cameron right after the movie came out, and he was about to embark on his expeditions, and that really kicked off this kind of side career I have going out in the ocean.
Oh,
And that has led not only to Titanic, but it's now made me more of a shipwreck hunter. And I've spending almost all my time now doing forensic analysis of a number of shipwrecks. In fact, this weekend, I have to do forensic analysis on a number of warships that sank in World War II and what happened to them after they left the surface. I'm doing that for a documentary series that will be coming out next year called Lost Ships. That's the working title. I don't know if that'll be the final title, but yeah, it's been one thing leading to another, and Titanic was the first step.
that's a really amazing that you've had such a big career, and I mean that you've contributed to so many ships, and you've had great connections as well with Ken Marshall and James Cameron, and all the crazy people, and you all have one thing in common, which of course is the Titanic. But there's so much of a bigger community, and I always find that there's an interesting connection between the Titanic and to every other ships as well. And loads of people had very different experiences. And that's pretty much all I could say, really, because I know I had something else in my mind, but my brain's got a bit foggy. But we're
No,
gonna
the thing that I learned with Titanic is that the shipwreck is actually usually the last surviving witness to a disaster or an event like a World War II battle, for instance. You will have human eyewitnesses to a disaster, and they have memories which may or may not be correct, which may or may not have been compromised over time, which may or may not have assimilated others' memories as they all share their stories. But a wreck, the steel on the bottom, steel doesn't lie. You hear that often. But what does happen with steel is it can be misinterpreted. And that's where you can get various analyses of a shipwreck on the bottom. Two people can look at the same steel and come up with two different conclusions. So I leave the analysis of eyewitness descriptions to other experts in the community, and I try these days to focus on what the wreck is trying to tell us. And in Titanic's case, I think she actually tells a story much different than the one that we have become accustomed to through study of books and eyewitness descriptions and things like that.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, the Titanic has always played a big part because it has the most important events in any other history that I have ever come across, really. And I know that with a few different experiences with people I have interviewed in the past, it just shows that there is a very strong story that all the events are glued together. And this is the question that I wanted to ask you, Parks, because what made you start becoming interested in the Titanic? What was your connection with it in the first place?
That goes back to my childhood. The earliest memory I have of Titanic is the 1953 movie Titanic, which I saw as a kid on television, replayed. I'm not that old to have seen it in theaters, but it the imagery struck me. The everybody standing on deck as the ship went down, singing "Near My God to Thee" and things like that. Back in those days, you could join the Titanic Historical Society. You could, through them, maybe learn of other researchers and exchange letter mail, postal mail with them. So conversations took a period of time to work themselves through as you sent off a request or a piece of conversation and you'd wait a few weeks to get a reply. That's how we conducted research back then. Then I went into the Navy, and I also had other areas that interest me too. And the list is long, and some of them I've pursued later in life, but we'll focus on Titanic. Then I went into the Navy, and all of those interests kind of went on hold for about 20 years while I pursued my active duty career. Then when I retired from the Navy, the world had essentially changed. This is 1995. The internet is now starting to become a thing, and there are discussion groups on the internet of Titanic people. And I went out onto these on various discussion lists. I missed some of the early famous Titanic flame wars, but they were still being talked about at that time. I can't remember the names of the people who engaged with them, but it was dramatic even back at the dawn of Titanic internet discussions. So things haven't changed that much. And I met some people. Key among them were Bill and Eric Sauter, who I exchanged a lot of messages with. And one day in San Diego, there was a fundraiser aboard the steamship Berkeley, which is part of the San Diego Maritime Museum here, where they were trying to raise funds to salvage a steamer down in Mexico called the SS Catalina. And at that event, Ken Marshall and Don Lynch were basically promoting and trying to fundraise with signed copies of Titanic and Illustrated History. So that's where I personally met Ken, well, and Bill and Eric as well. I met them there, and then they introduced me to Ken and Don, and then it went from there. We just had discussions, and discussions led to more discussions. And I had, because of my name, Parks Stephenson, in the Navy, I had a call sign of Sparks. It's a redo of my name. So in those days in the internet, you had to, you hardly ever posted under your real name. You had your little moniker. So I just used my call sign, Sparks, and there were already Sparks out there. So I made it Sparks 401. I don't know where I got the number 401 from. It just came to me. And people began to see my post under Sparks 401. And since Sparks also happens to be the nickname of the maritime radioman, I got a lot of questions about the Marconi system. I didn't know much about it at the time, but I decided to make it a specialty, and I dug into it, um, and drew together all the information I could draw together on Titanic's Marconi system, which wasn't much at that time. And what we had was very generic. And Ken at one point says, Jim Cameron is going out on an expedition here in a year or so. Do you want to share your research with him in case he can get inside the Marconi room? I said, sure. So he introduced me to him, and I gave him my research, told him what he could expect to see in there, and he actually got in the Marconi room and saw and recognized what things were based on what I gave him. And from then on, I was part of his team. So that's how it started.
Oh, what a really interesting story. And I know with the Marconi room, we're going to come back onto that in a little bit because there is something that has been debatable recently about the Marconi wireless radio, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
But with all the connections that have happened over the past few years, when was your first trip down to the ocean floor to see the Titanic?
It was supposed to be in 2001, except that 9/11 happened. I was supposed to join Cameron's expedition in the middle of it, but then 9/11 happened, and the ship actually got stuck outside of U.S. territorial waters for about a month or so. Those people who were on the ship at the time got a lot of dives, lucky them. Those of us who were outside the bubble couldn't get out there. So I didn't go out to the Titanic wreck site until 2005. And that was when I dove. Now that was, again, another variation of a story. We had a lot of dives in 2005, but we were also shooting what Discovery Channel was billing as a live event. And you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So instead of relying on an actual live event on the day of the broadcast when technical issues could really screw things up, we filmed safe scenes prior to the actual broadcast date. And to make it look like it was a live broadcast, everybody had to wear the same clothes and sit in the same positions. So for those that were diving in the mirrors, they got a lot of dives in the mirrors. Myself, I was in the control room with Don Lynch and Ken Marshall. We sat in the control room the whole time. And there was never an opportunity for us to dive because it would have not worked into the whole live broadcast kind of thing that they had going. So I was actually leaving the expedition, and I was at the airport in St. John's preparing to go home when a PA ran up to me with a phone and said, Jim wants to talk to you. Okay, and got on the phone. He says, do you want to dive? And I said, of course I want to dive. He said, I have chartered a couple of dives in the next charter that's going out to the Titanic wreck site in order to clean up all the bot tether that we left on the wreck. Now that bot tether is biodegradable, and there was another charter going right back out there, and Jim didn't want them taking images of the wreck with all these strings all over the place, because when they send an ROV inside the wreck, it's got a tether. It's the control for it. It's not a wireless system. And they drive the ROV in and out of the wreck, and then they drive it out and cut the tether, and the ROV recovers. And like I said, the tether is designed to be biodegradable. It would disappear over a period of time, but not in a short period of time. So Jim chartered a couple of dives to go down and pick up all that tether, reel it all in, and that's how I got to dive on Titanic as Jim's garbage man.
Oh, I mean, James Cameron always plans everything right, and I always thought that he was the planner of everything, as
Oh
far
yeah,
as I know. But
yes. I mean, he has people that that organize the charters, that do the logistics and put everything in place. But as far as dive plans are concerned and what we're going to do with the wreck, that's all Jim.
that's definitely like really good planning there, and it just goes to show really about what planning can do, especially looking in towards the near future. But when you dived to the shipwreck, How
Mhm.
dangerous is it if you have to go from the ocean surface to the floor, 2.5 miles down, which will take you 2 hours and 30 minutes to get there?
Um, it's dangerous, but I'm not going to worry about that. And now, having been 3 times as deep as Titanic, Titanic's now I look back on as a shallow dive. But either way, whether you're going um, down to Titanic or down into the Hadal Deep, um, there's nobody that can come help you if you get stuck. Well, I take that back. When we were diving on Titanic during Jim Cameron's time, we had 2 mirrors, and actually my mirror suffered a hydraulic failure while on my dive, and we had to set down on Titanic's boat deck. So now I can say that I've actually been aboard Titanic. And the other mirror had to come over and check us out. And luckily, we didn't lose the hydraulics, but in a life support system, we lost the hydraulics to the manipulator arm, which meant we couldn't reel in any more bot tether, but we were not in any danger, immediate danger at that point. It's always a concern because if that failed, what else is going to fail? But you go down there, you make the decision to go down there, you're going to go down there. You don't think about things like there's no way of rescuing us if something happens. If something happens, it'll probably happen quickly and you probably would never even know it. You just don't think about those things. And when I'm on the wreck, as soon as we touch down, you mentioned earlier the long dive down. It's actually quicker now. Like in the limiting factor in 2019, it only took us a little over an hour to get to the Titanic wreck site.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it went down a lot quicker than the mirrors did. But as soon as we on the descent, I usually take a nap. So I don't care how many hours it is. I'm usually, because there's nothing to see. You're going down. You've turned your lights off in order to save battery power. There's nothing to see out the viewports. All you're doing is sitting there as you fall through the water column. So I take a nap. But as soon as we touch down, I'm eyes out the viewport. And if I have a camera, I'm alternating between eyeballs and camera, looking at everything I can look at, trying to keep my bearings, because you never see the wreck like you do in the movies, nicely lit, you can see the whole distance, no, you see what's in, your light, basically. And a lot of times you'll come up, like when we first approached the wreck, all of a sudden there's a big rusted steel wall in front of you. And you got to figure out where on the ship is this segment of steel wall. And you look for a porthole, and you look for a lapping plate or something that will orient you to where you are. And then from there on, it's just trying to see everything you can see. People say, well, when you're there, you must be overwhelmed with emotion. You're on Titanic, that's got to be an emotional moment. It's not for me anyway. Maybe other people will get emotional, but I'm in pure data acquisition mode. I turn into a human computer, and I'm trying to get as much information as I can. I'll think about it later, like on the ascent coming back up, but not at the time, not on the wreck. It's all, I'm there for scientific data gathering, essentially, is how I see myself. I'm not a tourist.
It's always different for everybody, and as scientists, I can imagine there's a lot of responsibility of gathering research and data, and all of that jazz. But I've heard now when you go down to the wreck, you can only see the bow now because the stern is really dangerous to visit. Is this true?
No, you can go to the stern. We went to the stern in 2019. But the second half of what you said is true. The stern is very dangerous, and you have to approach it with extreme caution. It's very torn. It's very jagged, especially the forward starboard end of the stern is chaotic, and you just have to treat it with respect. You have a sonar aboard your submersible. It's a short range sonar, but it will give you a heads up and when something's coming your way, even before you see it. So you can navigate around the stern. You just have to be very careful.
And I mean, also, if anything goes wrong, then that's it. It's all over, really.
I guess it
Like you
is.
said
Yeah.
before, Parks. I mean, it sounds like it can be scary in one way, but in another way, if you have a team who knows what they are doing, then you're okay. You're completely okay. But I know that there should be a lot of training required as well, I can imagine.
Well, I'm just an observer. So my fate is totally in the hands of the submersible pilot. And I just have to assume that they're good at what they do. Now, when I dove on Titanic with Victor Vescovo, he was relatively new to piloting the submarine around the submersible around wrecks. And he made the first dive himself, which I thought was very brave. He didn't know the Titanic wreck. I mean, he brought me along to be his guide, but he did the first dive on his own. He wanted to dive solo on the wreck. Now, he stayed well clear of it. Um, and, uh, and as we had 5 dives during that expedition, and with each dive better and better and better. And now he's pretty good about navigating around a wreck. But yeah, and I won't say there's no training involved before that. There is a submersible simulator, at least there was, that Victor went through, and the mirrors were piloted by Russian pilots who had been running the mirrors around the wreck and other things underwater for many years. So they were all very experienced. You just have to trust in their experience. Just like every time you get on an airliner, you have to trust the pilot knows what he's doing, because your fate is in his hands, his or her hands. Victor Vescovo is the only person to date who has dived solo on the wreck.
But Victor is so brave, and I know that I would never have the courage to do that if I wasn't experienced, or if I was an experienced submarinist. I would never go down to the Titanic by myself, never in a million years. But looking onto that, really, because from what I understand, Parks, you have an interest in navigation and technology. So, say, for example, you like to explore engines in ships. And I noticed during my research that in 2006, a person had asked you a question on um Encyclopedia Titanica about the Marconi wireless radio. And this is where the wireless radio comes in, which the discussions began in 2020. Now with the plans to cut open the hull of the ship and raise the radio from the wreck, what are your thoughts on the debate of raising parts of the ship in the near future? So we'll say that if there was any member of the team who actually decide to confirm and go ahead with taking the submarine and then cutting a very important piece in history, because with lots of people, they did cut on the big piece. What do you think on that, Parks? Do you agree or do you disagree on that? What are your thoughts?
Well, it was my proposal to recover the Marconi apparatus from the wreck.
Really?
And yes, it was my proposal to do that, but that was the conceptual proposal. Our generation, and basically what I call the first generation of Titanic explorers, we've been lucky to have the wreck there for us to explore and to learn from. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the wreck has stories to tell, and you want to listen to those stories. And in order to get the stories in the purest form, you don't want to disturb anything. But as in any archaeological site, which Titanic is a marine archaeological site, hasn't been treated like one, but there are steps being taken now to establish Titanic as an archaeological site. And I don't want to use the word exploited, but explored, studied along archaeological rules. There comes a time when there's some artifacts that are in danger due to ongoing corrosion, collapse, deterioration, etc., that need to be recovered so that they can continue to be available for future generations to come. Because, like I said, we are lucky that we have the wreck with us today. Future generations are not going to have the wreck. It's going to keep breaking down and breaking down over time. It's not disappearing in 30 years like some people claim, but it's going to eventually break down. And as you would with any other archaeological site, there are things that you want to save from destruction, from eradication, so that future generations could continue to have a personal link to this disaster. Now, Titanic enthusiasm is never going to go away. It appeals to generation after generation after generation. And as the wreck deteriorates, future generations are going to be losing those personal links to the wreck. So in certain instances, when there are what I would call historically significant artifacts that are in danger of being destroyed by the ongoing collapse of the structure around it, then conceptually, I've made the argument that these artifacts need to be recovered. You can decide when you recover if you want to restore it to working condition, which I believe the Marconi motor generator set could, so that you could hear Titanic spark again, or you can leave it as is. That's a decision that others can make. Regardless, it was my argument that we should recover the Marconi apparatus and in as non-intrusive a way as possible. And that was a key point. And I started working with RMST Incorporated, who wanted to recover the Marconi apparatus in conjunction with a couple of other organizations. The first extraction plan that I saw was, in my opinion, too invasive. It was basically a smash and grab operation. And at that point, I pulled away from the effort. And I really angered RMST when I did that. But they went ahead to the court that has oversight over the wreck for approval of their plan. And they used the paperwork that I gave them, the arguments that I gave them. But the court found that it was too destructive and asked them to go back and try to develop a more laparoscopic or less intrusive way of recovering it. Because the deck house in which the Marconi transmitting apparatus is up on the boat deck. It's high up in the wreck. It's been sheltered for the past century by the after portion of the officers' quarters deck house. And that's been good. That sheltered and preserved that transmitting apparatus so that in 2001, Jim Cameron could survey it first time and then resurvey it in 2005. But now it's starting to collapse. That area is collapsing, and it's actually collapsing all around it. And it's only a matter of time before it collapses on the transmitting equipment. And like we saw in 2019 with the captain's bathtub, it becomes buried under the debris of which used to be the protective overhead. And now what once protected it is now burying it. Oh, yeah. So I'm still, and then to finish the story, RMST evidently never could develop a more acceptable extraction plan due to financial difficulties. And as of now, that extraction plan is permanently on hold. I know of nobody who is making concrete plans right now to extract the Marconi apparatus, which in one sense, I'm glad they're not going to do the smash and grab. In another sense, we might be witnesses to the collapse of the deck house around it and loss of that equipment forever. People say, well, why don't you just build a replica of it? Well, because we don't exactly know what it looks like. The Marconi company doesn't have any schematics on it, any mechanical drawings of it or anything. It's the only known existing 5 kilowatt marine telegraph station in the world. There may be one inside Britannic, but divers were in Britannic this past summer, and they could not get to the silent room. They just couldn't. And one diver has already died on Britannic going after the Marconi room. So it's not an easy thing. And making an exact replica, you won't really know that it's exact unless you have the original to compare it to. There are no other equivalent original pieces out there. I know various people have Marconi room mock-ups. There's a very good privately built one in the UK, but they just do the receiving apparatus, the Marconi room itself, or the operator's set. No one has ever tried to replicate the actual silent room, the transmitting apparatus. So, the thing that created the spark, created Titanic's voice, so to speak. So anyway, but even aside from that, even if you could build an exact replica, you are still losing a direct link for future generations. It's always going to be a replica. One of my first cars was a replica of a 1935 Auburn 851 boat-tail speedster, and it was built on the frame of a Ford. It had a Ford engine in it, and it looked like an Auburn. But whenever anybody came up to this, is this a real one? No. Okay, it's fiberglass. Okay, it doesn't give you that personal touch. You know what I mean? So that, I still think the concept of recovering the apparatus is a good one. The surveys that Jim has done in 2001 and 2005, I'm currently writing the report on that because I want to establish his surveys as an archaeological baseline, which is the first step that has to be done before you try to remove anything. Again, leaving the wreck in situ allows stories to be extracted from the wreck. You mess that up, you contaminate or eradicate those stories. But as with any other archaeological site, if you survey it in detail, like you do a crime scene, mark where all the bullets lay, where the body laid, all like that. When you mark it all down, that's when you can start to remove evidence for closer examination, or in this case, permanent sharing with generations of Titanic enthusiasts. And so the surveys that Jim did satisfy that condition, where we established the archaeological baseline for that area, and then we can possibly extract it.
That I've heard about like the story of the Marconi wireless radio for some time, really, because not long after that happened, I know that it was in British newspapers everywhere for the past 2 years, because a lot of people did get involved with RMS Titanic Incorporated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that included a British MP for Ireland. And then, of course, one newspaper said that it was cancelled because of COVID, but there are some chances that it could return, like you said as well there, Parks. But then when you talked about the Marconi wireless radio, it got me thinking about all of the Titanic exhibitions that host all the things that are from the wreck. And this one includes the recent visit that I've been to is the special Titanic the Exhibition Museum in London. And I've heard that there were so many artifacts from the wreck that were really undiscovered, as well as the ones that family and private collectors have donated to, whether they are from their own country or everywhere else around the world. It just seemed so interesting to think that if history is still there for future generations, then it can create so much potential, and it can be very special for Titanic enthusiasts and the Titanic community in general. But then you've really got to think about the devil's advocate, because survivors or descendants of Titanic survivors and people who have died, they argue that the Titanic is a grave site and it should be left alone. Have you ever come across a person who said that, whether it was a relative or another Titanic enthusiast or someone else?
I have, and I understand that line of argument, but my pushback on that is that there is a great desire to know about Titanic. And going to the wreck, the expeditions that started going to the wreck, starting in 1985 and through this very year, and these expeditions are going to keep ongoing. We continue to learn more and more and more about the wreck. I have learned so much more about the Titanic story from the wreck than I did from all my study from books and everything before then. So, number one, there is a great thirst to learn more and more about the Titanic story. And I would say to survivors that this is done to honor your relative or whoever died. We're not trying to exploit it. And I know people say, well, they're just in it for money, 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 money. By the way, I've never been paid for all the years that I've been on Titanic. I get my expenses reimbursed. That's it.
Oh gosh.
I do not get paid for my work. It is a hobby. You talked about a career. I don't get, it's a non-paying career, which I guess defines a hobby. So there are people that are working on this to bring out, because we have an interest in telling Titanic's story. That's our interest in going down there. That's our interest in analyzing the wreck, what the steel's telling us. When we go inside and we find things like the Marconi apparatus, I mean, going inside and looking at the Marconi apparatus, I saw the switch positions. And from that, I could extrapolate what Harold Bride's last actions were. He never spoke to him because it didn't seem to be important to him, but we have a greater curiosity about it. And what Harold Bride did not tell us in person, we can extract from the physical attributes still visible inside the wreck. So there are things to continue to be learned. This is why you go there. But we also go to the Great Pyramids and to the ruins of Luxor. And mankind has an insatiable desire to know about their history. And with the primary people gone and the records being incomplete in many cases, we're left to examine what they left behind and try and fill out the rest of the story. That's why we go. I don't see it as desecration of a graveyard. Desecration of a graveyard is when you go in and you dig up bodies and you rip jewelry off of them and you defile their memory. We don't go to Titanic to defile her memory. We go there to honor it and to bring more information to everybody who wants to know more about it. So every explorer I know, aside from one pirate expedition, unauthorized, it happened in 2002.
Oh yeah.
If you're on an authorized expedition, every explorer I know has treated that wreck with the utmost respect. And I know that some people throw names at each other. Some of these guys have egos. And, Bob Ballard might have a problem with Jim Cameron, or Jim Cameron might have a problem with Victor Vescovo, or Victor Vescovo might have, it goes, it's a little bit of ego at play, but ultimately they're all united by a shared respect for the wreck. And accidents have happened. I think every single explorer that's ever been to the site has inadvertently collided with it, caused some damage. But that is the cost of operating in the deep around a shipwreck. It is very dangerous. People forget that. You can die, and there are things down there that will kill you. There are currents that will push you into the wreck. There's changes in currents. I've seen a current change direction completely during the course of one dive. 1 minute it's pushing you away from the wreck, and when you're fighting that, all of a sudden it pushes you into the wreck. So it's very dangerous. And nobody, like I said, everybody has inadvertently collided with the wreck, but nobody did it on purpose. Nobody was in a rush. Nobody was motivated by greed. People accuse RMST of being into it for greed, but you have to understand how much money it costs to conserve these artifacts, to maintain them, to send them out into the world and properly display them to the public and educate the public. There's cost involved with all this. I could have found the USS Indianapolis 6 years before Paul Allen's group found it. We had it on a sonar array, but we could not raise the $4 million at that time that was estimated to get deep ocean ROVs to go down and verify the identity of this sonar image. So money is part of what makes all this happen. And it's not all about greed or lining someone's pockets. Some people have profited off Titanic. I don't consider them people that I would normally associate with. But everybody I know that has gone down to Titanic, from Ballard to Cameron to Vescovo and others, they went out there for a passion, and they went out there with respect and to bring back information that everybody so desperately wants. So two survivors' families, I sympathize with it. I'll never condemn them for arguing that we shouldn't go to the wreck. That's their opinion, but I will try and go out of my way to explain to them that we're not out there to exploit their relatives. We're not out there to sully their memories or anything like that. We're out there to bring back this information and learn more about the disaster that took their relatives' lives.
I mean, it's always hard, really, when you have to go with the debatable between when you have to look in two points of view. But one of the artifacts that really got me interested, and I don't know if this has been updated or not, but I heard that somewhere down in the wreck is the captain's logbook. And as far as I know, I don't think anyone has found it. If that
No,
makes sense, no?
no, they haven't found it, and I don't think it would be deep inside the wreck. The log, and you have to ask, what are you talking about by the logbook? There is what's called in American terms, I don't know what the British equivalent is, but in American terms, when you're aboard ship and you're on the bridge, you keep what's called a scrap log. That's where you jot down everything that you think is significant during your watch. After your watch, the contents of the scrap log are taken, and some of it is transcribed into the ship's official log. They'll weed out the stuff that's not important. They will put, they'll put down into the formal log what was important that happened during that watch. And the reason why they do this is because a ship's log is a legal document. It could be called up in the settlement of an insurance claim if you wanted to try and figure out what's going on. But what happened to the captain's log? Which one? The scrap log, the formal log? I don't think a formal log for RMS Titanic would be of any help to hardly anybody because they never had the time to transcribe the notes after they hit the iceberg or the events immediately leading up the iceberg into the formal log. What happened to the scrap log? I don't know. Who knows? I don't think it's deep in the wreck. It was up on the bridge, the upper areas. As you know, the bridge was completely destroyed during the sinking. And anything with that, including the chart room, the captain's cabin, all that paperwork in the captain's office and the chart room and everything, that all just went out into the ocean. And that stuff's biodegradable. It's paper. So I don't think the log exists anymore. And I don't think it's somewhere in the wreck to be found. And even if we found the formal log, I don't think it would tell us much.
With paper, it's really interesting because there are some bits that do survive around the wreck, such as what was his name? I don't know his full name, but there was a major who actually had his wallet tumble into the sea after he had to save people from lifeboat 13 and lifeboat 15 colliding into each other. And it is really
Major
interesting.
Pushin. Yeah, well, I mean, certain papers have been recovered from the wreck site, but almost in every case, and I can't speak authoritatively about this because I don't fully know, but every instance of surviving paper I've seen from the wreck site was housed in something that protected it, either a leather valise, a leather wallet, something like that, and they were able to extract it out. And of course, there's the famous drawing of Rose that Jack did. We saw how that survived, but that also was in a leather satchel. In a safe, a leather satchel in a safe, but whatever.
Oh, but it's always interesting to look at it through fact and fiction, and whatever happens or what is going to be found in the future before the Titanic disappears forever, it's always going to be debatable, and it's always going to cause rifts. So that's probably what I think. But then we're going to be probably moving on to one final question because this is something that I have told people so many times and in each episode that I have, but looking at a point of view of someone who's actually been to the wreck, how do you think the Titanic should be remembered?
Um, that's a that's a difficult question to answer. I'll just say that right now, my all the work that I've ever done for Titanic has now narrowed down to one thing, and that is I'm working almost all of my Titanic work right now is dedicated solely to establishing the wreck as an archaeological site. I want to try and document all the information that we have gathered to date, and make it available so that it can be a reference for continued exploration of the site. And instead of being kind of informally done by individual explorers as it has in the past, if we can satisfy the criteria for it as an archaeological site with surveys to establish a baseline, then it can be treated just like any other archaeological site that you can think of, like an Egyptian archaeological site or Pompeii or Stonehenge or any archaeological dig that you're aware of. People are not going to stop going to the Titanic wreck site. And my worry is that people will go there to exploit it. We do have protection treaties in place that apply mostly to US and UK residents, but other international entities could decide to jump in on this, and they're not bound by the agreement. I want the site to be recognized internationally as a protected archaeological site. You can still go there. You can still image it. You can model it, which is a current desire among people, is to create a virtual reality replica of the wreck site, photogrammetry and that kind of stuff. And you can still recover artifacts from it, but it has to be done responsibly. It has to be authorized by a competent authority whose main interest is in the site being treated as an archaeological site. So that's what I'm working on, and that's how I see the wreck site. Now, not everybody sees it the same way I do, but personally speaking, that's my opinion.
I think it was very well said there, Parks, because especially when you have to look at things like that, you have to look about, again, like we said before, the importance of the history and what can we show future generations, not just from your experiences to the dives to the wreck, as well as James Cameron's and all the other future explorers who want to be in the same boat. It's always going to be like that, and the importance of the Titanic should definitely be remembered in whatever circumstances, and I definitely agree with that. But we're going to actually wrap it up here. Parks, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an
Well, you're very
absolute pleasure
welcome.
talking to you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
You'll have to keep a copy of this when you after you broadcast it in April, because like I said, I'll be at sea at the time and I'll want to see it when I get back.
Oh yes. What part of the sea are you actually going to? Because you said before the interview you're going to the Pacific Ocean.
Yes, most of my time is Pacific right now. In April, I should be off the island of Midway looking for the USS Yorktown and the 4 Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu.
Well, I definitely don't know Japanese, but they sound like really they sound like really good, interesting ships to follow, really. And yeah, I'll definitely have to look into the research of that because I never have heard them before. And I would still look for like different things to actually research and all of that. And you have got me convinced to try and explore new ships and learn histories about them. But Parks, best of luck, and I will send a copy of this once it goes up. But yeah, I think we'll definitely wrap up there. And until then, guys, I will catch you tomorrow for another Titanic episode. Take care. Bye.